The wilderness is a core aspect of the RuneScape identity. Throughout the past 10 years, Jagex has done update after update to it, and yet players still feel incredibly hostile towards it and most PKers stopped going there. Today I want to explore why that is and try to solve the core issue the wilderness seems to have. Personally, I don't care if the wilderness dies or not. I'm not a PKer and I could do just fine without the wilderness being PvP. However, I also do like a good challenge, and solving the issue with the wilderness design actually sounds really fun, so I would keep an open mind if I were you watching this. I know it's hard to let go of what we think we know, but sometimes change can be for the better, and obviously my objective is to try and make the wilderness a viable place for PvP. Before I start this portion of the video, I just want to lay some context in order for you to understand the point I'm going to be making. When I refer to PKers, I mean the general player killer, and by general player killer I mean the average RuneScape player that occasionally puts on PvP gear and steps into the wilderness. I acknowledge there's a portion of the PvP community that not only likes to fight in the wilderness, they also bring substantial risk while doing so. However, these players would bring that risk regardless if they are in the wilderness or not. What I'm trying to explore in this portion of the video is the incentives and setbacks average RuneScape players might have when it comes to starting PvP, and PKers that aren't very experienced with PvP, since those are usually the most affected people by the incentives that the wilderness updates bring. Therefore, it's only natural that my focus would be on the portion of the player base that gets affected by the incentives to PvP in the wilderness, rather than the people that will fight and risk regardless if there are updates or not. When people hear wilderness, there is one core aspect that always comes to mind. I risk, I reward. But is that true? I want to explore if that is the general case, and if it is it something that should be upheld? For the most part, the idea sounds good in theory. Having a zone where people bring a lot of valuable stuff in order to win big or lose at all is an enticing prospect. However, I'm not fully convinced that that is the case. When I hear people talk about the wilderness, I don't find it to be the case that most people just want that rare PK that will make them rich, primarily because that can be applied to any PvP scenario such as PvP worlds, and in that scenario, fighting PKers may yield a bigger reward than fighting people in the wilderness, for substantially less risk, since you don't need to survive to a safe zone with your earnings, nor do you need to worry about teams. You can also rely more on your skill as a PKer rather than trying to find a target that is worse equipped or has less supplies than you. There is even more evidence that I risk, I reward is not the predominant mentality players have when it comes to the wilderness. For the most part, the vast majority of PKers bring very cheap gear like solid robes or mystics alongside a rune crossbow and black the-eyed ranged switch. These are far from being highly valuable. In fact, they are dirt cheap and yet are the choice of vast majority of PKers. But maybe the high risk, high reward comes from the targets of said PKers. After all, the wilderness is filled with good skilling and PVM content that drops so much valuable stuff. But, well, PVMers don't go to the wilderness to PK, and therefore the general rule is to not take anything that you are not willing to lose, and people aren't generally willing to lose a lot. This means most PVMers don't really take any more risk than your usual black d'hide or monk robes while protecting their most valuable items. So, from both sides, we have low risk. Of course, exceptions exist, and it's disingenuous to pretend no one ever risks anything in the wilderness, or that PVMers don't sometimes make mistakes by forgetting to bank a valuable item and bringing that item with them. However, these are uncommon sights, or in some cases, they're just faked PKs for a video. So I think it's wrong to believe the notion that the wilderness is high risk, high reward. For the most part, players have gotten wise with how much they can get away with and therefore risk very little, and PKers do exactly the same. As for the reward, at least as far as PVM goes, maybe that's true. Jagex has put so much GP in wilderness drops to try and make this mentality ring true. But in reality, it simply isn't. While it is true they can get a lot of GP from the wilderness, methods there are far from being the best GP per hour. They are still good, but given that you get PK'd, most people don't tend to hoard that much loot, choosing to bank very often. And with PK's interference, that GP per hour is even lower. This obviously means that overall, PKers also have lower rewards since PVMers also risk less. As a result, I'm going to dismiss this notion entirely. While in principle it sounds exciting, I think it's an outdated idea that is keeping us from making updates that actually bring people into the wilderness. RuneScape 3 tried it and they failed. Old school RuneScape has been trying it for 11 years and people have incredibly sour views towards the wilderness, and PKers keep not PKing there anymore. All of this also brings another issue with it, and the reason why PVMers hate your guts if you are a PKer. While the wilderness is touted as a PvP zone, that PvP does not stand for player versus player. It stands for predator versus prey. This is another core aspect that is pseudo-hidden from everyone. PKers are predators and everyone else is prey. Now, it might be the case that this is intended design for the wilderness. The problem is, this type of gameplay isn't particularly fun. If you want to understand why PVMers hate the wilderness and vote down every PvP update, this is a key thing you need to keep in mind. PVMers aren't against PvP content being added to the game. They are against PvP content that is inevitably going to be used against them when they are trying to do their own thing, since Jagex keeps pushing for wilderness updates filled with insane GP PVM content. This leads to a frustrating gameplay loop, and as such PVMers are going to do anything in their power to weaken the side that keeps annoying them. And I get it, if every time that I wanted to kill a tree I had to go and kill a gargoyle, I would also lose my shit fairly quickly. This is a major point of frustration and one that isn't helped with the continuous wilderness updates that reinforce and support this predator versus prey mentality. After all, the point of releasing wilderness bosses that drop 100 million GP per hour in alkaballs is to bring PVMers to a PvP zone so PKers can kill them and as a result find other PKers. The counter argument I see all the time is the same. Well, if you don't want to get killed, don't go to a PvP zone. And that's cool and all, but these wilderness updates are designed for non-PvP people to go to the wilderness to incentivize PKers to also go there. And guess what happens when non-PKers get tired of getting killed and stop going to the wilderness? Yeah, Jagex pretty much just adds another shiny new GP source because we need PVMers to kill and then there's PKers we can fight. The content you're introducing isn't asking people to PvP, it's asking people to make a spot popular enough with non-PKers and hoping PKers eventually go there. That's the problem with this argument, is that eventually non-PKers get fed up with being the target. The major issue with this high risk, high reward and predator versus prey idea is that despite being passed on as PvP ideas, they are fundamentally PVM ones. PvP players aren't the target of said ideas or updates, PVMers are. That's the type of content that tends to be touted as the high reward. It's the PVM one, not the PvP one. You get a high reward from killing a PVMer, not a PKer. The entire gameplay loop design of the wilderness just makes the entire thing incredibly annoying, especially when we actually consider that people tend to be risk averse. This means PKers are actually more incentivized to kill PVMers and ignore other PKers since they yield the highest reward for the lowest risk available, since PVMers don't fight back. And PVMers don't fight back because the reward is not worth the risk and time investment. So in reality, this entire gameplay loop, while created to incentivize PvP, does anything but. Once upon a time, the solution to the lack of PvP incentives was to make a zone popular enough so PKers would inevitably find each other. This, however, is a very outdated idea and one that was proven to not be very successful in modern years. There are other issues with this approach as well, such as the fact that a lot of items just get their value crashed due to the sheer supply that comes from the wilderness content to try and maintain this idea that the wilderness is high risk, high reward. The economy is fundamental to the game after all. This is amongst other issues that these types of updates have, but I wanted to specifically focus on the high risk, high reward mentality, since that is the main thing that people usually tend to talk about when mentioning the wilderness. Ultimately, the wilderness has had a very outdated design philosophy that has been failing long-term for the past 10 years. It's low risk, relatively low reward, doesn't actually engage people to PvP, and even when it does, it doesn't create a level-headed playing field when fairness is something people care a lot about. So, with all of that being said, how do we actually fix it? What can we actually do that makes the wilderness both less frustrating for the people taking part in it, but also engages people to PvP more? And well, the answer is surprising. Understand the actual problem. I know I've been telling you all about why the wilderness has problems, however, all of them stem from one single problem, a problem that is caused by one of the core aspects of every MMORPG: progression. So before I actually get into solving anything, let me give you a little background on how progression evolved in RuneScape, and I'm gonna use PvM as an example. The core progression of PvM is to kill bosses to get better gear, to kill stronger bosses to get better gear, and so on. That is the core progression aspect of PvM. However, as probably you have already figured out, that's far from the only incentive to do PvM in RuneScape. That's because over the years, extra incentives have been created to allow devs to keep creating new content without needing to entirely rely on just having better gear to give out. For example, another aspect of PvM are the combat achievements, a set of tasks you are given that require you to have a certain mastery over multiple pieces of PvM content in the game. By completing these tasks, you unlock rewards that aid you doing PvM. So aside from the main mode of progression of unlocking better gear, you also get progression in the form of permanent rewards that give you an easier time engaging and progressing through PvM. Another example are the cosmetics you can get from PvM, be it the pets, the Zakelm, or just cool looking gear. This is another aspect of the game people might be interested in, so PvM here isn't just about the gear progression necessarily, but it's more about getting something that looks cool on your character or getting a cool looking follower. Yet another example is the collection log. Of course, this being an MMORPG, people will try and collect things. The collection log allows you to collect the bragging rights of obtaining certain drops from bosses. This is yet another motivator, since not every boss that is released is going to give you a piece of gear that is better than what you already have. The Twisted Bow was released in 2017, and yet it's still the best ranged weapon in the game. But since the collection log exists, players whose incentive is to checkmark content they have done in the game don't lose interest in doing new PvM content, since the gear progression isn't what they are after. So, as a whole, we can now see that PvM has a core incentive to motivate players to engage with it. However, over the years, different incentives that motivated different types of players with different objectives were also added, making PvM's progression something that is diverse and not completely hinging on a single motivator. This helps develop content for the future, as well as further incentivize players to engage with different aspects of PvM, even if at first they may not have been motivated to do so. If we compare this to PvP, the core aspect is fairly simple. You kill players to get GP, to afford better gear, to kill players to get GP, and so on. Having GP is the main motivator because you also need GP to engage in the activity. And that's it. There's no other incentives to do PvP. And to make matters worse, PvP also involves risking your own progression. This is something I didn't touch on with PvM, but as you accrue more gear and better gear, generally speaking, you're not going to lose it even if you die to bosses. Therefore, progression earned stays with you, which makes it feel like you are getting somewhere. With PvP, you don't keep that progression, because you need to risk it in order to gain more of it. And that's the problem. Players tend to be risk averse, which is why the high risk high reward mentality usually doesn't actually translate very well and doesn't really apply to the wilderness anymore. In essence, it's hard to ask players to do an activity when the main way to progress in said activity means continuously losing progress in said activity every time you fail because of the need to risk it in order to make any progress at all. And at the beginning, when you are not good at PvP, you're gonna be losing your progress a lot. And even if you want to compare PvM in the sake of losing GP when you die, as soon as you kill a boss, you don't really die anymore. That guarantee doesn't exist with PvP, and furthermore, even putting that aside, PvM has other incentives where you can sacrifice GP to try and go for them. Some players spend a lot of GP on supplies and such to try and grind for boss pets or champion scrolls. These extra incentives can sometimes make players prioritize the progression of a specific goal against the core progression of another. This, again, doesn't happen in PvP. With PvP, if I die 10 times and I kill one player, practically speaking, I've died 9 times. That's it, I've lost a bunch of GP and I have nothing to show for it. With PvM, if I lose a bunch of GP hunting for a champion scroll, I at least have the scroll to show for it. And that's the main problem that PvP progression has. Losing progression by dying can be a good thing, because some games, like roguelikes, are designed that way. The Wilderness isn't. MMORPGs are about progress, and losing progress here feels bad since the Wilderness and the stuff you get from there is connected to the rest of the game. So we either redesign the entirety of the Wilderness so you can forage weapons and such by making it more of a roguelike experience that is completely separate from the rest of the game, or we follow the design that other aspects of the game have had and add extra incentives to do PvP. While I think it would be very fun to try and create a roguelike RuneScape experience, I would rather take the latter here. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to give players extra incentives and better progression that doesn't entirely revolve around GP. On top of that, we're also gonna change the content in the Wilderness to skew from Predator vs Prey into a more player versus player where the incentive and reward is to kill other players. Finally, we arrived to the part of the video where you don't need to worry about game design stuff anymore and can just go, oh, that looks cool. Now, I have made plenty of content for the Wilderness, however, in this section I will mostly just talk about mostly 2 macro changes that I have. I do have more changes than this, but some of them are connected with other pieces of content I've made, so I decided to introduce them later in the video. The changes here aren't meant to change the Wilderness and completely redesign it necessarily. What I'm looking to do is to simply shift the culture of the Wilderness from Predator vs Prey, which requires constant GP infusion type updates, to a more PvP-centric culture, where you are both encouraged and rewarded for engaging with PvP. As such, most of the changes and content updates that I will bring on later are all created from the perspective to help and incentivize you to engage with PvP for the sake of fighting other players rather than creating a scenario where you want to kill someone because they have a lot of loot from PvM and they won't fight back. First up, and to start negatively, we're going to be removing a lot of the content that the Wilderness has. I think this is a necessary step to create space for future content and help the Wilderness not feel as bloated. For this, we are going to categorize the current Wilderness content in 3 groups. Number 1, needs removal. Content that is unfit for the Wilderness usually incentivizes little to no PvP and has no thematic ties to the Wilderness, in my opinion at least, that one being subjective obviously. Some of it being more fit to be reallocated rather than outright removed from the game. Needs duplication, content that can stay in the Wilderness but should have an alternative outside providing a weaker loot table. Or left unchanged, content that should stay exclusive to the Wilderness or content that doesn't need any action to it. Resource area, needs removal. This area was part of the first Wilderness Rejuvenation project. It looks like a private server area and there's no way around it. Personally, I don't find it a very good area to have in the Wilderness, especially when it comes to PvP. It's an exclusive skilling area providing very high level resource nodes and, in the case of Dark Crabs, exclusive fish, although Dark Crabs do exist outside of the resource area. Pure skilling doesn't really incentivize any PvP, and doesn't really fit thematically with the area either, therefore should be entirely removed from the game, and the Dark Crabs should remain at this spot of the east of the Wilderness that already exists. The Rune Golem can also be relocated, since I do enjoy the idea of having an ent but for mining, but still the entire area and most of it should just be removed outright. Chaos Temple, left unchanged. At the Chaos Temple you can offer bones for full XP while having a chance to not have them consumed. Training prayer can already happen outside of the Wilderness. While it doesn't exactly incentivize PvP directly, it does fit the area thematically and it's an iconic hotspot as far as the Wilderness and PvP goes. Abyss, needs removal. I understand the appeal, however I think this does absolutely nothing as far as PvP goes. The most PvP that happens here is players sitting there waiting for a runecrafter to kill. Most players already hate runecrafting, you don't need to sour their experience even further. On top of that, the Guardians of the Rift made this an even worse spot to PK due to the relatively low volume of players. Simply relocate this to an outside spot outside of the Wilderness, since as of right now this does absolutely nothing. Chaos Altar, needs removal. It's pretty much the same case as the Abyss, but even worse for PvP since no one actually goes through the altar itself rather than the Abyss. Just change its location to make it easier to access. Eye level rune ores, left unchanged. You can already do mining outside of the wilderness. While scaling content doesn't tend to contribute to PvP, thematically it would make sense for some valuable ores to be available in a desolate land that not a lot of miners go to. So, for now, we can leave them. Black Chinchompas need removal. It's pretty much the same case as the resource area. It does very little to actually incentivize PvP. I get that it's an odd spot for PKers to go and PK, however 99% of the time the PKers go after the skillers, not other PKers, which goes against the purpose of their design, which is, putting highly profitable things in the wilderness to attract the non-PvPers, so PvPers also come by and fight each other. This simply doesn't really happen. The entire fight is literally between PvPers and skillers, so just reallocate them to outside of the wilderness. You can still maybe leave some of them in the wilderness if you want, but definitely at least duplicate them so you have a non-wilderness version people can actually go to. Ints, left unchanged. Ints already exist in the Woodcutting Guild. These are just a little bit better. While it's skilling content again, it doesn't really incentivize PvP, but it does play into the theme of a desolate land. Again, while skilling content doesn't necessarily incentivize PvP, sometimes just having content for the sake of thematically fitting the area and making sure that the area isn't purely just content players can engage with can be a good thing. Not every tree in the game needs to be useful for cutting, sometimes they're just decoration. Rogue's Chest needs duplication. It's a bit weird you don't really have any appealing chests outside of these. Most chests around the game, while providing good loot, don't really respawn that fast, meaning most players don't tend to engage with chests as part of their thieving training. Making these with worse loot available elsewhere would actually be a nice addition to the skill. The ones in the wilderness should remain as, again, while not incentivizing much PvP, it thematically fits the region. Agility course needs removal. I'm all for having agility courses that give a nice amount of XP, but being honest, what does this do actually for PvP? Nothing other than annoying those who want to accelerate their already grueling slow skill. On top of that, they added a dispenser that shits out alcohol drops. I guess we have an urban planning situation on our hands. If only they added one more source of alcohols, that would fix the wilderness. But since it doesn't, it's unnecessary to have such a mechanic in the game. You can relocate the wilderness course if you want, but just remove the dispenser outright. Slayer tasks and caves, left unchanged. An extra incentive to do Slayer in the wilderness. While again, not a huge incentive to do PvP through Slayer, it's just Slayer, so there isn't big harm in leaving it in the wilderness. Most of it is available outside of the wilderness anyway. Most of the stuff you can get exclusive through Slayer in the wilderness. You can already buy it from the GE, so no harm, no foul. Mage Arena and Mage Arena 2. Left unchanged. It's a PvM activity that awards a Bastion slot magic cape. However, the entire challenge feels risky and leaves you on the edge, so thematically it's something that really fits the wilderness, and as such I decided to leave it, even if it is a pain in the ass to complete sometimes due to some PKers. Clue Scrolls needs removal. No point in being in the wilderness, nor do they incentivize any kind of PvP. Some of the biggest toxicity I see amongst PKers and non-PKers comes from clue scroll doers flaming PKers for killing them while they're doing a clue scroll. Since there is no gameplay reason for these two to be mixed, removing wilderness clue scroll steps is just for the best for everyone, especially to reduce toxicity. Callisto, Vetian, Venenaris and their soloable counterparts need duplication. It does make sense for these bosses to stay in the wilderness despite being PvM content. People at these bosses tend to be far more likely to actually fight back. Furthermore, they do drop a PvP spec weapon, which is one of our objectives, to have content be rewarding for PvP. I do think, however, they should have a non-wieldy version with much worse drop rates for the Voidwaker and the rest of the loot. They are fun bosses with nice pets, and honestly it's a shame that people feel forced to go into the wilderness just to get them, and even though those incentives are not necessarily PvP incentives, therefore making non-wilderness versions of them kind of desirable, especially because, again, some people just want the boss pets and they don't want to go to a PvP zone to get them, since they are not related to PvP. Revenants, left unchanged. For better or worse, as far as PvP content in the wilderness goes, This is the closest to actually providing any incentive to PvP. On top of that, almost of the rewards are PvP related, or they are related to doing content in the wilderness. They also embody the I risk, I reward mentality, thanks to requiring being skulled to get better drops and paying GP to enter the cave. I still don't really believe it's I risk, I reward due to what we talked about before, but it's the one that comes the closest to getting it, so I decided to leave them exclusive to the wilderness. Chaos Elemental, Chaos Fanatic and Scorpia. Needs duplication. It's the same scenario as the other wilderness bosses. I chose not to remove them as I think it's part of how iconic the wilderness is nowadays. They have been released over 10 years ago at this point. However, much like the other bosses, I feel like people would like to do these bosses without needing to be on a PvP zone. As such, making non-welder versions with weaker drop tables should be a good thing to do. Crazy Archaeologist. Left unchanged. There is already a non-wilderness version of him, and thematically, the ruins having his presence is very fitting. I would just say that maybe his fedora could be dropped by the non-wilderness version with the worst drop table. That would be nice. King Black Dragon. Needs removal. Let's be clear about one thing here. The KBD is actually not in the wilderness, only the entrance is. Therefore, the fact that this is considered a wilderness boss is an even bigger flimsy excuse than the other ones. It really does not make any sense, and honestly it just makes it way more annoying than not. Relocating the entrance to outside of the wilderness should be the way to go. Put it maybe in the Taverly dungeon where the blue dragons are or something, or where the black dragons are even, but not in the wilderness. It's the least thing. I would say the King Black Dragon is the abyss of PVM. Air Obelisk needs removal. It shouldn't be part of the wilderness, especially due to how hard it is to access to begin with. It's not that big of a loss anyway, so it's fine to just relocate it to another part of the Gillenor map. Eldar Chaos Druids. Left unchanged. Thematically, it fits, despite being a primarily PvM activity. It also has drops mostly used in PvP, which again is something that we want, wilderness content with rewards related to PvP. Also, a lot of them do teleblock you and stuff like that, so that's actually a really nice addition when it comes to the PvP side of things, even if they are NPCs. Wilderness Gold Wars Dungeon. Left unchanged. It thematically fits, and given how chaotic the Gold Wars dungeon usually is, it's actually a nice place to incentivize people to PvP, thus I decided to leave it in. I understand that nowadays not a lot of people actually PvP in it, and it's mostly PvMers getting ecumenical keys, but we also do have Gold Wars dungeon outside of the wilderness, so it's just too much of an issue to rework it, just leave it for now. Lava Dragons. Left unchanged. Thematically coherent, plenty of dragons already around Gillenor, just leave this alone for now. Fountain of Ruin. Left unchanged. The idea is nice, even if I feel like it could probably provide more incentives for people to actually PvP there, since I'm not looking to actually tweak any of the content that I decided to leave in. I won't actually go into it, but, you know, the Fountain of Ruins does indeed belong into the wilderness. Although I would probably add the Amulet of Eternal Glory at 1 in 100,000 from the normal fountain in the Heroes Guild or something, because, again, it doesn't make much sense that that specific drop is specific to the wilderness. Nor does it make sense that the Fountain of Ruin is the one to provide it, because it's a bit weird for the Fountain of Ruin to allow you to just charge amulets. It's not part of the quest or anything, so just a bit weird. Zombie Pirates and Pirate Lockers. Needs removal. While my goal with some pieces of content was to take them out of the wilderness and move them somewhere else, others I think should just be outright removed. This is one of those. Honestly, I have no sympathy for updates that are just straight GP farms and nothing else. If you removed Bounty Hunter due to the bot farms, why do you think introducing this is a good idea? Overall, you get way too many alchable items from such low-level monsters, relatively speaking, and yet again, much like the resource area and the wilderness dispenser, this feels like a private server. Remove it from the game, reallocate unique drops to other content in the wilderness. And that's all for most pieces of content. If I did not mention something here, just assume I decided to leave it in the wilderness completely unchanged, and I forgot to mention it. Some of the content here could also have had changes, however I decided to not touch on already existing wilderness content, as I don't think it would be too relevant for what I was trying to achieve here. Again, my main objective is to introduce PvP updates that incentivize people to engage with it, therefore I did not want to spend my time on pre-existing wilderness content when none of it really fitted my mold. So with all of that out of the way, it's time to talk about the extra incentives to PvP in the wilderness. I didn't want to change the wilderness or what the wilderness is at its core, therefore this is purely additional, optional systems that can offer extra rewards when PvPing in the wilderness. Essentially, think old Bounty Hunter, but without the forced target and with a proper expensive shop. I know, it has been tried before and Bounty Hunter had to be reworked and removed several times, but I think while I based myself on it, it's simply not the same system. So let's talk about how it works and why I designed it that way. The system is very simple. If you have loot keys unlocked, you will be given an option to talk to Scully and choose how many items you want to sacrifice. These items are the PK'd items you get from players. There's the requirement of having the loot keys enabled. You also won't be able to change how many items you sacrifice after seeing the loot key. You can change the amount of items you sacrifice at any time, but that sacrifice is applied when you kill a player, not when you open the key. That's why you cannot change the amount of items that you sacrifice after you see the loot. The sacrificed items are converted into points based on their GE value, meaning if you choose to keep the 3 most valuable items that the player has to offer when you PK someone, the 3 highest GE value items are going to be given to you, while the rest is destroyed and converted to points. The points that you get given are also based on GP or GE value of the items sacrificed, so if you sacrifice 100k worth of loot, you get 100k worth of points. These points can be spent in a related store to acquire PvP related rewards. This is already quite a bit of info, so let me explain why I designed it this way. When I was looking to design a system for the wilderness, I wanted to achieve 2 things. First, I wanted to have an extra system that would reward you specifically for killing players. Secondly, I wanted to solve the issue of certain PvP related items being incredibly cheap. One of the things I talked about earlier was how you don't really get anything else from PvP other than the loot you get. Thus, a system like this makes it feel like you are always making progress towards something, even if, realistically, you are actually losing GP. The point of this system isn't to make it more rewarding for killing players in the wilderness, but rather to get concrete things you can work towards by killing players in the wilderness. In essence, if a weapon costs 1 million points, you do need to PK 1 million GP worth of supplies and gear. For the people that don't care about the supplies and cheaper gear, they get to progress towards an extra reward, while those who might not be so great at PKing still have a concrete point of progress rather than losing a bunch of GP and have nothing to show for it at all. Another great thing about this system is that since the points are tied to GP value of items you PK, you create an item sink. It can of course be abused, but at least some items will be leaving the game. One of the main issues with the value in PvP is that once you PK an item, it just goes back on the economy, usually back to the GE to be used again. These over time devalues items to walkable value. With this system, those items finally have a way to leave the game and as a result increase in value. The reason why I'm not allowing people to simply sacrifice items but rather have to PK them is to encourage people to actually go out there and kill other people rather than just allowing rich people to buy whatever items they want to sacrifice and buy the strongest thing the shop has to offer. Yes, some players will still do that, especially with bot farms, but at least there's an extra effort involved in doing all of that. To be clear, again, I don't think this system is actually immune to exploitation. For one, you can just, again, load up a bunch of bots in low rank gear and kill them over and over to eventually get the rewards. But the point of this system is that even if that is happening, value is being traded rather than just created from nothing, which was the problem with Bounty Hunter. And of course, this system works everywhere in the wilderness rather than pigeonholing you to the ditch, specifically if you want to make use of the rewards for the shop. Lastly, it actually rewards players for doing PvP for something other than the loot they already get. As I mentioned earlier, again, PvP really is missing extra incentives. It actually confused me why PvP never had any proper ways to get PvP items for themselves through the means of PvP. It's always PvM items that have to be used were sometimes designed for PvP. With the system, that would somewhat change. So, to summarize, it's an extra system that it's also an item sink. To reiterate, this is completely optional. You don't have to waste any of the items you PK if you don't want to. And now to talk about the store. Truth be told, I didn't actually design any of the rewards for it. Most of the focus was on the system itself and how it would impact PKing, and not on the specific rewards you get. For what's worth, the rewards would be mostly PvP related gear, some, things like weapons, armor, jewelry, anything you can think of in terms of giving you PvP or good stats for PvP. And since I didn't actually design anything for the store, I'm gonna make it up for you by talking about a flaw in how Jagex approaches PvP gear instead. To simply put, I think it's a mistake to not lock PvP gear to PvP zones. I get it's hard to balance gear to be good at a thing you want it to be good, without players abusing it in another area, but I think it's time that you allow PvP players to obtain stuff for PvP through PvP. And if the concern is balance, lock it to PvP and balance it around PvP. On top of that, Jagex needs to be more assertive with the changes they make for PvP. Usually what happens is Jagex not wanting to buff/nerf an item because they are afraid some people are going to be upset. But that's always going to happen. I think that if Jagex truly cared about PvP, it's time they start treating it as most other multiplayer games out there. Make changes, see how players use it and feel about it, and then keep buffing or nerfing it until it's in a spot that you don't feel you need to change it anymore. I'm sure PvP players will be able to deal with this stuff getting changed. They're grown-ups after all. This is also one of the reasons I wanted a lot of the current content in the Wilderness to either be removed or have non-PvP versions. It's so PvMers don't feel the need to vote no on PvP related things, since it really won't affect them that much anymore. If your system is entirely predator versus prey, you bet the prey will do anything it can to defend itself, and in this case that thing is to vote no and demand nerfs on PvP related things, which isn't helpful if your other objective is to incentivize people to do PvP. But I'm not entirely done with the store. While yes, there is some stuff you can buy with points that you can either use or sell, there's also another thing, or rather, a type of thing. Another thing I wanted to introduce with this store is the ability to spend kills. I know some people have hundreds and thousands of players killed in their accounts, and well, there's nothing to do with them. Well, alongside the tradable rewards, the store would have untradable rewards where you could spend your KC on. The vast majority of these rewards are related to unlocks than necessarily items you can actually purchase. These unlocks are things related to either PvP or the Wilderness, things that would, make your PKing a little bit better or your Wilderness adventure a little bit less annoying. Remember, these lists can always be expanded on or changed, but here are some of the rewards that you would be able to unlock, so, to give you an idea of the type of incentives and type of progression they could also give PvP players that even if they don't make GP, they can still unlock. Ancient Teleport Tablet. Do you want to make some teleport tablets for your Wilderness adventure? Is it a pain to have to go all the way to the pyramid every time you do? Well, with this unlock, you can have this ability right in the comfort of your player own house. Desert Treasure 1 is still required in order to unlock this. Tree Root Network. Much like how the magic mushroom trees work in Fossil Island, this transportation system would connect to the early levels of the Wilderness. Wherever there are trees, there's a tree route nearby to take you whatever trees you need to attend to. Ability to grow a canoe tree. Did you misclick and ended up in the middle of the Wilderness with no way to get back? Well, if only you've done some PvP and you've unlocked the ability to grow a tree so you don't have to run all the way back to a safe zone to teleport. Thankfully for you, that's an ability you can unlock with enough Wilderness experience. Gnome Lighter. Speaking of traveling, sure you can do it by water, but what about by air? Well, this Gnome Lighter is fearless, and as such, it can give you the ability to fly into the Wilderness volcano, provided you show them you are a fearsome warrior. Well, not into the Wilderness volcano, more like somewhere nearby. Demonic Blessing. So, I've heard that demonic ruins actually restore prayer points of those nearby. What if you could make that twice as fast? All you have to do is prove yourself by sacrificing some adventurers. Get off me. Are dragons bringing you down? The winds keep PJing you? Well, fear not, because with this fearsome unlock you can make all monsters in the Wilderness unaggressive to you. With the exception of bosses, those are a bit too big. And don't worry, this ability is tolerable at any time, so you can feel the nice warmth of lava dragons can give you in case it's winter. Monster stacking. Are you tired of PKers ruining your trips? Do you wish you had an easier way to fight back? Well, with this unlock, you can. For every monster you kill, your damage towards other players will increase by 2% for a total of 5 stacks. These stacks do disappear shall you remain out of combat for longer than 30 seconds, leave the wilderness, or enter a safe zone. I don't like the Slayer Elm. Are you worried about risking your sweet Slayer Elm every time you are on task? Wish you could get the benefits without putting it at risk? With this mighty unlock, you can have the Slayer Elm passive apply even when you're not wearing it. The bonuses are only applicable if you are doing Wilderness Slayer and if you are on task, obviously. Note this! Are you tired of using your hard-earned medic keys on that chest in the middle of the maze that you finally just figured out what it was? Well, it's a bit annoying with all of the items it dropped, so what if you could have them noted instead? Well, if you kill enough people, the chest will fear you enough and bow down to your noted demands. These are some examples of the types of unlocks you can expect. Ultimately, I wanted to reward those who PvP in the wilderness with some neat unlocks in the region. While they are not all directly related to PvP, the point of these was more to have a general reward system that can be achieved through PvP, even for things that might not be directly associated with it. Also, to cap this entire thing off, and something I think it's a bit deserved for the wilderness, the Cape of Fighting. It's a cosmetic cape that upgrades the more kills you have, much like the raid capes. Just a small something for those who do PvP in the wilderness alongside the other rewards I presented here. As far as the system goes, there it is. It's not massive or anything, as I wasn't trying to completely change the wilderness, but more so to give players extra incentives for PvP while in the wilderness, where I hope that slowly, over time, the mentality shifts from Predator vs Prey into a more player versus player perspective. If PvP is what we need to incentivize, then the rewards need to, importantly, be achieved by doing exactly that, and I think the system will definitely help with that. But obviously, a system is nothing without the incentive of the rewards it can offer. I mean, cool new system, but why would you bother going to the wilderness now that I removed most content from it? Well, you're in luck, because me removing a lot of wilderness content was to make space for brand new, and oh boy, do I have a couple of ideas that I want you to try out. The content here is going to be mostly focused on incentivizing PvP. Basically, I want content that rewards people that engage in fights rather than creating content whose entire reward is to give you a lot of GP without actually fighting, which is one of the main issues I detailed above multiple times at this point. In here, you'll want to kill other players in order to maximize loot and in order to survive. Another thing that I will establish are rewards. To simply put, I came up with some, kind of little bit of rewards for these activities. The objective of them was to give PvP exclusive items they could work towards that would enhance their experience in the wilderness. The rewards stated here are exclusive to the wilderness and their specific content and cannot be used outside unless stated otherwise. Most of them can, however, be traded, given you want to make extra GP instead of just using the reward yourself. Just assume that if an item can be used to fight other players, most likely it can be only used exclusively in the wilderness. With all of that out of the way, let's get into all of the things you'll be able to do in the wilderness. First up, we have the Golden Dragon Guardian. The Golden Dragon Guardian is an activity where 4 players participate. It's divided into teams, a guardian and 3 attackers. The objective of the guardian is to defend the golden dragon, the objective of the attackers is to kill it. If the guardian successfully defeats all the attackers, they will get offered a reward for their service. If the attackers defeat the dragon, they will be able to share the dragon's loot. The dragon is a passive NPC and does not attack. The guardian is immune to damage, however can still be frozen, entangled and stand. Attackers can be damaged, frozen, entangled and stand. Players will fight until one of the parties is completely wiped. You take your own gear and supplies, however it is a safe death inside the arena. Players will be put into a lobby where everyone can contribute GP to the Golden Guardian. The Guardian is the person with the highest contribution. The contributions are even and only revealed after the contribution phase. If the Guardian wins, they will claim everyone else's GP and their entry fee. If the attackers win, the GP will be divided on a percentage basis depending on how much each person donated. If a player contributes 90% of the GP from the attackers, they will also get 90% of the GP of the Guardian that the Guardian contributed, plus the entry fee they paid. On top of all of that, the winning party is rewarded with a chest containing the Golden Dragon's loot. This mostly includes alkaballs, wilderness supplies, and the likes. However, it also includes a unique reward, the Golden Skull. The Golden Skull, this is an item, when equipped, will make monsters in the wilderness attack your attacker. This attack is secondary and does not work to PJ the attacker from you. The monsters will simply help you fight off the attacker as helpers rather than substitutes for your fight. It only works when another player is attacking you, specifically around monsters. This piece of content is a scenario of PvMers encountering players turned on its head. The objective is to have a PvP or PvM scenario rather where someone can PvP while the other players are forced to handle PvP while PvMing rather than you're usually running away. On top of that, the GP contribution is to create the idea of stakes. You are not just fighting over loot, you are fighting over your own contribution and other people's contributions. On top of that, this can be used as a mental case of you perhaps not chancing a lot of GP, but also not being rewarded as much for the win, or if you do contribute a lot, maybe the other 3 players didn't and they are maybe in for a big payday if they win. The most important aspect is to make sure the players are always able to understand the stakes before going into the match and let their skill do the talking. Thematically, it also made sense since the dragon exists. There is a free version where contributions are needed or aren't needed rather. However, loot is much more limited and the unique reward is not available. As for the skull itself, the thought process was to be, thematically relevant to the minigame. A minigame based on PvM and PvP would obviously make thematic sense out of an exclusive item that can involve monsters somehow. So you have monsters fighting on your behalf alongside you. The monsters obviously only attack PKers that are attacking you, and this item cannot be used outside of the wilderness or even in the wilderness to increase your DPS outside of PvP scenarios. It only works to attack other players, not other monsters. Duelist Kingdom. This is a town in Deep Wildy established by the best duelists in Gielinor. This town is inaccessible by players with the exception of those who can prove themselves. Gain access to the town by beating the gatekeeper in a 1v1 tri-breed fight. The gatekeeper will then see you as worthy enough to grant you privilege to use the town's services. This town is a safe zone and has the option to fight different masters at their disciplines. You have pure 1v1s, hobby maulers, free-to-play, DHing, although these styles can be changed to suit players' popularity or the popularity of each styles. The styles are a matter of taste, the 1v1s are a way of life. These NPCs can be used for practice, however defeating them at least once opens up the town more and more, as well as unlocking more services such as general stores, weapon stores and so on. The town is also home to the Challenge Arena. This arena is cursed due to the years of fighting. As a result, fighting in it will curse both of the duelists. Some of the curses include disabling of prayers, bleeding effects, rotting your food, special attack drain, and so on. These effects are applied to both duelists. The arena is only available after you've defeated all 5 NPCs, since it requires a great deal of experience and understanding of your capabilities when PKing. The modifier gets chosen at random at the beginning of the fight and does not change for its duration. The modifier is the same for both players to prevent too much randomness. Death is not safe, and as such, one of the rewards is the loot you get from your opponent. On top of that, every win grants you Valor that you can claim from an NPC. Each Valor will roll a random bit of loot. Amongst this loot, you can receive Mithril and Adamant seeds, as well as Dragon seeds. These Dragon seeds allow you to choose a direction you will be moved into after planting them. You can select the default option or right-click and use the Plant South, Plant East, Plant West or Plant North options. You can also get your hands on the Anchoring Scroll. With this, I mostly wanted to have a spot where players can be pseudo-introduced to PvP in a PvM environment. For all purposes, NPCs are still NPCs, and having a place where players can train their skills, especially when offering multiple disciplines, is a nice addition to the game and something that I think it's missing. That barrier of entry is too demanding at the moment, and this would lower it. As for the arena, I just wanted to create an environment where it's straight up 1v1s, but for more seasoned and experienced players to spice up the PvP they usually do. It relies on experience as well as knowledge of the game, rather than just straight up fast clicking. 1v1s were the primary focus of this place, as I wanted to create a wilderness experience that was more about the skill players have, rather than hoping no team is gonna jump on top of you. The rewards aren't the best, but I did have to find a home for the pirate rewards since I removed the content in the previous section for this spot. So I just felt that this was like the best way I could introduce them back. Further rewards can always be added, of course, and we can always measure the amount of loot is actually coming out of the arena, because this was one of the main issues with Bounty Hunter, so it's nice to keep an eye out for them. Boss Echoes. Now, I know what you're thinking, Leagues, but no, I came up with this before that, and the timing could have not been worse, honestly. No, Boss Echoes are versions of quest bosses that you can fight in PvP. Currently, I have two versions of them located in specific places in the wilderness. This would work much the same way as KBD Arena, for example. Going there is PvP, the arena itself is not. However, you cannot teleport away from the arena, you will just be placed outside of it. The place you leave the arena is random and not the same as you enter. For now, you can either fight Solos or Lucian. They will fight like human bosses and will have special attacks. Solos, for example, will have a big ice barrage that you'll have to dodge that covers several times. Lucian will be able to rain black skulls from the sky and invoke certain skeletons with armors and whatnot that you need to take care of. Depending on which version you fight, you can either get a Ring of Loot, giving you extra 10% loot when in the wilderness, or a Ring of Monsters, giving you 10% extra damage against wilderness monsters. The main purpose of these is to infuse NPCs from the Duelist Kingdom, which will have that PvP moveset with some PvM boss moveset. Essentially, I want the player to feel like they are fighting in a PvP battle, but with NPCs that have attacks that they simply don't have. Attacks that make the fight far more interesting when used in a PvP environment. Last Man Standing. Oh, that name is already in use? Okay, let's call this fucking First to Win. Why not? Sure, fuck it. First to Win. This is a dangerous minigame. You will have a random zone spawning in the wilderness, anywhere really. After 5 minutes, the zone will become dangerous and PvP will be enabled. You are not allowed to teleport away, and people aren't allowed to enter after the PvP has been enabled. The objective is to kill everyone else, so that you're the last person standing. You're not just fighting other people, you are fighting over the penance chest, which can all be accessed by the winner. This is a chaos-filled environment with as little as 5 people, or as many as 100. While this can be tackled solo, the minigame is more aimed at the chaos clans can create amongst themselves. The last person standing will get all of the loot from all of the people that died there. On top of that, you have access to the chest, which rewards you with a penance sword. The penance sword has a special property. You attack your allies instead of attacking your opponents. The sword will heal them instead of damaging them. This is more of a support item for fights. With this one, I wanted to create an activity that was chaotic and mostly aimed at the low input, high loot occasion. Chances to win are low, but the reward is incredibly high. While I designed it for solo players in mind, there will be, of course, worlds where clans are going to try and get their hands on the loot. And that's not necessarily bad, as clans are part of the game experience. This doesn't mean they will always win, of course, so it's still nice to try. As for the sword, I just wanted to try and create more of a team dynamic by introducing items that can elevate the different parts of the game, such as creating more of a support role. It is a wacky, idea, but it's one that I think it could be fun and was directly inspired by the healer role in Barbarian Assault, which is, where the weapon gets its name. Having someone on the team that can both heal and fight sounds like an interesting concept, so I just threw this reward in. Dark Warrior Stronghold. The Dark Warrior's fortress has long been a place with a very cool design. You have one way in. Well, now good luck to try and make your way out. In this activity, the Dark Warrior's fortress will have a chest spawn at a set time. This chest includes lots of loot, but you have to unlock it. The way you unlock it is by attempting to lockpick the chest with, well, lockpicks. This is a long process that will very likely take several lockpicks and several minutes. The chance to unlock it will scale with your thieving level, but even at 99, don't expect a quick unlock. Alongside this, a message will be displayed to everyone that you are attempting to lockpick the chest. The loot mostly involves supplies, alcohols, whatever you can think of. However, there is a small chance you can get your hands on the Ancient Curse Sprayer. The Ancient Curse, when turned on, will apply stacks to a specific player, draining their attack with each stack applied. This is a simple activity with the focus of calling teams and clans to fight each other. You have to come in, have an individual deal with the chest while the rest protects them, and after the chest is open, you also have to escape with your loot. The idea is to have a space that teams and clans can fight each other, or with a reward in mind, since right now there really aren't any places in the wilderness where you can do that at. The Ancient Curse Prayer is just a nice PvP oriented prayer and a nice incentives even in terms of GP for organized PvP activities, such as again teams and clans. I think I've stressed that enough. Again, the Dark Fortress was chosen because you have one way in, the chest is placed in the middle of the fortress, so it sort of becomes this game of you can create a very good defense because there's only one way in, but then to get out, there's also only one way out, so I thought it was a nice setting for this activity. Shapeshifter boss. What if we grabbed the concept of the Golden Dragon Guardian and flipped it on its head? So basically, what if we had a norm PVM encounter? The Shapeshifter is a boss encounter available in the wilderness in a specific arena. This arena can host multiple people. Much like the first to win, the lobby is a safe holding zone until the battle actually starts. And once the battle does start, the Shapeshifter will shift into any existing boss in Gielinor. The Shapeshifter will use the same mechanics and have the same drop table. But before you get excited, that's not everything. The boss will scale its stats to how many players are in the arena, so if there are 100 players, the boss will have 100 players worth of HP. That means, however, that the boss will also have 100 rolls of loot, since the amount of loot is, again, related to how many players are in the arena. There is a twist, however. The arena cannot be teleported away from, and it's fully PvP, meaning while you are killing the boss, you will have to defend yourself from other players, or they will get your loot. Or, if you want to take advantage of the situation, you can always go out of your way to kill other players. There is even an extra incentive for this. If 100 players join the arena, the boss will have 100 loot rolls. However, the boss will only distribute them amongst the survivors, so if only 20 players survive the encounter, each will walk away with 5 loot rolls. So killing players amongst the chaos isn't just good due to the easier loot, since the boss will help you kill them, but that also means extra loot for you once you eventually kill the boss. I would however be careful with killing too many players. The boss doesn't scale down mid-fight, so if you kill too many players, you might then lack the supplies or damage to finish the boss off and lose all the potential loot. It's a fine balance and one that you have to choose. Are you going to the edge and try and claim everything for yourself and potentially fail and lose everything, or make allies so everyone can walk away with their fair share? This all however comes with some unique rewards, because despite the boss having the same loot tables as the boss it shifts into, it does not have the same unique drops, but it does have its own. They are the Metamorphosis Stone, Cursed Energy and Sign of the Unknowing. The Metamorphosis Stone is an item that will allow you to shapeshift into any boss. This is purely cosmetic, but a nice thematic reward. The Sign of Unknowing is an item that allows you to unnote items on the fly. This item is dormant while in your inventory and you have to activate it in order to use it. Upon activation, it will instantly skull you and not allow you to use any safe zone in the wilderness, as well as not being able to leave the wilderness as a whole for a limited amount of time. You can reactivate it instantly after the item goes dormant again, but it will apply all the restriction every time you activate it. You can bring a lot of supplies and outlast all of your opponents with this one. This boss is yet again supposed to bring some chaos into a PvP zone. Yet again I offer an activity where I encourage people to kill each other, since that is often the desired outcome due to the increased rewards alongside the loot another player has to offer. I've had this idea for a few months at least. This was one of the first ideas I've had for this video, and honestly I always found the concept pretty interesting. I'm asking players to be greedy and kill others so they can increase their loot chances at the risk of themselves dying and losing everything. I don't know how it would play out practically, but that's the objective anyway. It's to walk that fine line. As for the rewards, the stone is an obvious one, just a nice little cosmetic reward. As for the sign, I know it sounds super OP, and that was the point. A lot of this video got me thinking about the high risk, high reward concept and what you could do with it. I think this sign is a good example of high risk, high reward. I'm essentially asking the players to risk a lot in order for the item to actually be worth using, and that it will allow them to make use of a great advantage being the almost limitless supplies if you really want. However, that all comes at a cost of losing it all if you end up dying. I wanted a synergy, or at least a synergetic design, where for you to make the best use of an item and gain the most advantage out of it, you also risk a lot. So essentially with this item, it's super high risk, but you can get so much reward with it. Essentially, the more you risk, the better you are in the wilderness, because the more supplies you'll have available for you. It's again a fine line to balance. The lower risk, the lower reward, the higher risk, the higher reward. Oh, and the cursed energy. Speaking of that, Zamorak Shrine. The Zamorak Shrine is a place where you can attempt to attune items in order for them to become cursed. Cursed items have extra bonuses that can be very useful in PvP. The process of attuning requires an item to attune, cursed energy, and a cursed stone. The energy comes from the shapeshifter boss, the items are mostly PvP related items, and the cursed stones come from all of the activities present in the wilderness. You will need all of them every time you want to attune an item. Attuning an item, however, is not guaranteed deal and can fail, consuming the items in the process. There is also a rare chance the item that you are trying to attune is destroyed in the process, leading to potential losses. If attuned successfully, however, you can enjoy some earned rewards. Such attunements include extra damage on your weapons. The percentage damage is fixed and is the same for all bonuses. Furthermore, these possibilities are fixed per item type. Ranged items will always have more attack against players protect from magic, melee items will always have more attacks against players protecting from ranged, and magic items will always have more attack against players protecting from melee. So essentially, you have a cursed version of an item with a damage bonus percentage and a normal version of that item, rather than having 10 different versions of the cursed item, each with differing bonus types and bonus percentages. This is done so we don't create 1,000 versions of the same item and to keep things straightforward. The cursed gear will have an option to unattune it, giving you the original weapon back. You can reattune it again if you so wish. The attuned weapons are, however, tradable on the GE. For now, these are very simple bonuses I've laid out. I have created many more and some unique ones, such as negating the power of offensive prayers. However, I decided to keep it simple for now. Mostly I wanted bonuses that would enhance the power of the combat triangle and reward the correct play when it comes to switching gear and prayers. Worth noting as well that all of these attunements are for the weapon slot, and yes, that can be expanded in the future, but yet again, I wanted to leave it somewhat simple as a form of trial. The best way to fight against these bonuses is to simply make sure that you switch your prayers and gear correctly when, taking into account the combat triangle. So essentially, if you are fighting against someone using ranged, I want you to pray ranged correctly, because then you'll completely negate the bonuses from the weapon. It's just to enhance the combat triangle itself. As for the activity, I found the idea of the wild worm kinda cool and wanted to give players the opportunity to enhance their weapons if they so choose. It's just a small thing, but it also does add depthness to the current combat triangle without making it overly complicated. I tried my best to use the current bonuses we sometimes find against certain monsters, such as the bonus against demons from the Arclight, or the bonus against dragons from the Dragon Hunter crossbow or the Dragon Hunter lance, and apply them from 4 players, which is why I chose to essentially do it in the form of prayers and protection prayers rather. And that pretty much spells the end for this section. Many were the activities proposed alongside the rewards. Of course, you can always change things about them, you can always change the rewards or add rewards as well, or just add more content in the future, but I think this gives you a good blueprint of the type of PvP content that the Wilderness actually deserves. Content where the main focus and reward is to kill other players, rather than the focus being on baiting people to come to the Wilderness to try and make a zone feel like it has activity. Not every idea is perfect, I'll concede that, but I have reiterated on them quite a bit, improving them chunk by chunk to give you a good idea of what's going on, and right now I'm happy with the state of a lot of them. In this video I mostly grappled with the idea that high risk high reward does not work in a predator versus prey environment, and how you need to give proper rewards for people actually risking things. On top of that, most of the activities proposed were created in an attempt to turn the Wilderness culture from predator versus prey to player versus player, a culture where killing other people is actually the most rewarding thing you can do, and sometimes the only thing that will give you a chance at certain rewards. Something people don't oftentimes see is what's actually left behind when making these videos. They involve a lot of iteration and reiteration, and the more time you spend on them, the more you develop the ideas. It's easy to just throw ideas in the air and call it a day, but for me, it's all about engaging with said ideas. I end up having a lot of ideas and only some of them get written down. And then, from the ones that do end up get written down, after further engaging with them, only some of them end up making the cut. This means that sometimes stuff that I create or come up with doesn't make the video, either due to not fitting the themes established, because I just didn't think the quality was up to standard, or because I simply didn't know how to develop the ideas further and felt at that point that they wouldn't work very well. So here's some ideas that ended up not making this video and why I decided to not include them or develop them any further. Evil Imp Grotto. This is a place full of imps. You can hunt them, and not only do they have a wider variety of imps, but they also have faster spawns. However, they are also mischievous and as such will occasionally unequip your items as well as steal your food. On top of that, the Grotto is on top of an ancient battle site, which created an evil imp. This imp has the same characteristics as the evil chicken. It's something you can attempt to defeat, however due to the nature of the site, ghosts will probably come out and fight you. You can ignore them or defeat them. Ghosts are a frequent appearance in this place, and you'll have to be careful when using it. They are, however, the other attraction as they have some neat loot in relation to the Revenants. The Grotto can get chaotic at times due to this. If you are looking to defeat players, however, this Grotto also has a neat feature as players will have increased stats when fighting other players. You can also get your hands on a pretty neat reward, the Chicken Dart. The Chicken Dart will transform other players into chickens, temporarily of course. The main reason why this got cut is because while I find the idea of imps messing with you while you are fighting other players, that is fun, but I did not find a satisfactory, or at least not a satisfactory way of pushing people to PvP in this place. These, as of right now anyway, has the same structure as the problematic Wilderness content updates that we have had, and I don't want to contribute to the pile. On top of that, it felt like it didn't have enough of a reward for it to stand on its own, and the Chicken Dart is more thematic for the evil chicken in the Champions Guild. Ultimately, it's a place I might come back to, but as of right now, I simply wasn't happy with it and thus decided to not include it. Always cold. This is a simple change that would make the Wilderness much more dangerous. Simply, in the Wilderness, every player would become instantly scold, and the scold would never go away. Good way to make things far riskier for all the rewards that the Wilderness has to offer. The objective of this was to make the Wilderness higher risk for the higher reward it offered. The reason I cut it is simply because, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, players are risk averse, so instead of risking more, they would simply take less gear, and as the risk would probably stay around the same, as people are already risking without a skull. Ultimately, it simply did not fit the mold of what I was looking to do. Also, high-risk worlds already exist, which kinda defeats the uniqueness this could have had in the wilderness. Zamorak's Storm, a storm that would appear randomly in the wilderness, instantly killing the person at the center of it. The reason I came up with this was to have the wilderness carry that feeling that you are never truly safe from anything when you are in it. It's a feeling that I think it's long lost, and it's one of the things that I dislike about the wilderness, is that people have gotten too comfortable with it, knowing when they can get away with things or not. This way players would always have that fear and respect towards the region. The reason for cutting it, however, is a bit obvious. While it sounds really fun, players might not really enjoy random punishing mechanics, especially not ones that won't tap you. There was also some thought about making it more likely to spawn in areas that have more players, so to try and dissuade clans from taking over specific spots. But ultimately, regardless of how you look at it, it simply did not fit what I was trying to accomplish as the video progressed, and as it simply got cut. Wilderness only clues. Clue scrolls, but in the wilderness with enhanced rewards. All the steps would be in the wilderness. Now, to be fair, this isn't my idea. It's an idea I've seen the community push sometimes. However, and as such, I decided to engage with it and try and incorporate it into the game. No matter how fun the idea looks, however, it simply won't work. It follows the same structure as the stuff in PvP zone, but with extra loot, which I'm simply not a fan on, as I've detailed earlier, and I've detailed the problems with that mentality throughout this entire video. I don't think there's anything wrong with having stuff in the wilderness that has extra loot, as long as you have the exact same rewards outside, but with worse loot. But at the same time, it's type of content that you should try your best to dissuade, and this just, again, didn't really fit the killing players more rewarding than doing non-PvP things. As a result, it simply did not fit what the video was trying to accomplish, it did not incentivize PvP, got cut. Revs wandering freely in the wilderness. Revs would be an occasion of you passing through one and stopping to kill it. This would make Revs less of a contested place and give players more space to go to other regions of the map and PK there, making them more active rather than just piling on a single thing. Rare loot would broadcast your player name and wilderness level to everyone in the wilderness. It's pretty much the same scenario as other ideas, it's simply too focused on PvM and it really doesn't incentivize much PvP. On top of that, it's also not very fun to go around and ant revs like this, and I doubt that many players would actually stop to kill them if they are, going towards something. Like, if I'm going towards an activity, the last thing I want is feel like I need to stop to delay it to try and get my hands on loot, simply because that loot is too rare of an opportunity to pass up, since revs wouldn't be as easy to find anymore. This ultimately just wasn't very fun, and at the end of the day, while I was done to try and counter the, hotspot that is Revenants with, Predator versus Prey, it simply didn't work out, so it got cut. Hellfire Bow. This is a bow RuneScape 3 has that gives you extra damage when in the wilderness. It cannot be banked or destroyed, and it simply drops in the wilderness once you are killed, or you choose to drop it. It sends sporadic messages of who is using it and which level in the wilderness is being used in. It's a nice incentive to push players to be around the wilderness more. Unfortunately, it's a PvM focused update, which has the problems I stated several times by now. It's simply not the culture we want to implement in the wilderness. This just pushes PvMers to PvM in the wilderness due to the bonus of being good at PvM, while calling other players to kill PvMers, which again, not the culture we want to establish. As such, it didn't last long. Natural hazards. Being in the wilderness is dangerous, and as such, you can be prone to being hit with volcanic rock or dangerous foes appearing to take you down. RuneScape 3 actually already tried this, and is exactly the reason why I axed it. Some of these ideas are years old, as, reworking the wilderness is something I've been meaning to do for ages now. It's probably one of the first ideas I've had for videos ever. I just got around to do it now, I guess. But honestly, I am glad RuneScape 3 tried this to show me it just won't really work. Simply put, it's not that fun in practice despite theoretically making the wilderness more dangerous, just too random and annoying for players to deal with no extra incentives to actually PvP. Actually, it's the exact same issue as the Zamorak Storm, less wilderness worlds. With less wilderness worlds, people find each other with much more ease, which also leads to an increased PvP activity. Fortunately, it's a good idea in theory, but in practice it's way more effort than it's worth, and it's also the wrong approach to making people fight each other. Again, you want to encourage people to fight each other because there's rewards in doing so. You don't want people to fight each other because they just happen to come across each other randomly and are, in a populated area in the wilderness. Again, that sometimes does work when it comes to increasing PvP, but it's kind of an outdated design that I want to shy away from. And thus, Coquette. Clue Scroll Shop. This shop allows you to sell your unique Clue Scroll items for currency. This currency can then be used in the same shop for rolls of the same tier of unique items you traded it. You can also gain unique items, not the common items that Clue Scrolls usually offer. It helps collection lock on players since it would be faster, however it would also be much more dangerous to do, having to carry lots of valuable items and currency in and out of the wilderness. I think it's easy to see why this one didn't really last long. While a nice sounding idea at first, the more I engaged with it, the more holes I created. First, I don't think it's great to have viable lock slots for one of the biggest accomplishments, which are the Clue Scroll lock slots. Secondly, yet again, doesn't really incentivize PvP, but rather it incentivizes the predator versus prey behavior, which we kinda want to avoid. While there are issues with unique Clue Scroll rewards and the lack of value in them since they're not used for matching game, this approach wouldn't have solved the core issue with them either. So ultimately, this was very quickly cut. Elemental bonuses. In an attempt to deepen the PvP experience, I came up with elemental bonuses. These are the bonuses that actually were replaced from the Zamorak Shrine section earlier on in the video. These bonuses worked like weaknesses and strengths, but it would be an extra layer. For instance, lightning would be strong against darkness, water would be good against fire, ice would be good against bleeding, and so on. There are 7 elemental bonuses that I created, all interact with each other on a deeper level than, just a combat triangle. Essentially it would be a thing on top of it. This has, obviously lots of potential, and, especially with all of the equipment enchanting, you can also even dedicate prayers to them if you want, so it can be like a huge thing. It personalizes immensely the PvP experience. It's an old system, and it's essentially the thing that got replaced by, the attunement of the cursed weapons that I mentioned in the video. At first, I liked the idea a lot. Making PvP deeper and allowing players to have many more choices is good, but the problems arose later. First, these had way too many variables, and requiring the creation of way too many items. Technically, yes, you can make them untradeable, to make them function a little bit better and not need to create 1,000 different items on the GE, but they still need to exist in the game. So essentially you cannot make different numbers. For example, if an item has plus 5% fire damage or plus 6%, those are 2 different items in the game, so it would just be a complete nightmare to develop that shit. That would be essentially dungeoneering released again in old school RuneScape. It would be the exact same logic, so it wouldn't be very fun to work on, I don't think. On top of that, let's face it, there would just be the system as the combat triangle. It's exactly the same thing, except it's different names and you have more of them rather than just the 3. So essentially you would have the normal combat triangle and the other combat triangle on top of it, so you would have 2 combat triangles going on at the same time. Then I later changed it to be about unique playstyles. So ice, for example, would make you attack much slower, but each attack did way more damage. Lightning had much faster attacks, as it made weapons 2 ticks faster. Essentially every weapon elemental style had its own unique way of engaging with it on top of the combat triangle. The problem is the overcomplication of the system itself. The fun thing about the old school RuneScape combat is that it's simple to understand. Most of the detail is in the execution, so this entire system just seemed a bit too much and a bit too complicated to implement. While I would love to see how it would turn out in game, I simply didn't think it was going in the right direction. All the time I spent on it, however, wasn't necessarily wasted, as it allowed me to come up with the bonuses against specific prayers. I think those are far better integrated to existing combat structure and don't change so much that the players feel like they need to learn an entire new game. Ultimately, even those were somewhat held back, given that, again, I didn't want to full-blown add 1,000 different modifiers to the existing game, because that would be just a complete nightmare to deal with. On this regard, I went much slower, and the system simply wouldn't have made it to the game due to how necessary complex it is. Something that fits into the existing combat, like the prayers and bonuses damage against them, simply does better and it's easier to understand, which is why I kept this system and essentially transformed it to be part of the prayer bonuses thing that I made. Maybe one day I'll revisit it, but for now it just wasn't worth it to pursue any further. Maybe it can even be a decent extra system for RuneScape 3, but certainly, as it stands right now, not for RuneScape. At least not old school RuneScape. And there you have it. These are some of the ideas that I did write down to further explore, and are not in any shape all of the ideas I've had. I constantly have ideas, but most of them just get thrown out without even being written down due to how easy they are to dismiss, or are just maybe too out there. An important part of developing ideas is having them and then allowing yourself to mentally engage with them to see if they stand against your own created structure. As such, I only write ideas down that pass that initial engagement test. Obviously, as the video and themes progresses, sometimes ideas get outdated purely because they don't fit the objective that I am giving the update anymore, given that I've changed how deep or specifically the focus that the update actually has, or maybe I just think that what I had written before just wasn't it, right? At first I was gonna make this video about I risk, I reward, and then I created some ideas for it, and I realized, wait, actually, I risk, I reward isn't even that big of a thing for the wilderness in a predator versus prey environment. So, yeah, sometimes ideas just get outdated purely because you change the way you're making the video with more research and more thought put into it. And even then, you know, I've seen that a lot of them just end up being changed the more I iterate upon them and the more I engage with them, and completely transform into other ideas. This was just sort of to give you an idea that not everything I come up with ends up making it through, and that I'm not exactly perfect when it comes to creating pieces of content or anything like that. I just like to engage with ideas, and I try my best to create interesting content. This was a nightmare to make, and I am glad to be done with it. While I've been meaning to make this for a very long time, and while I wanted to engage with the idea that content in the wilderness should be more PvP focused, I just didn't anticipate that one of my conclusions would be that I risk, I reward simply isn't a good design philosophy with the current wilderness content, and players don't even really follow that much anymore. I'm quite surprised with how it turned out, and honestly, I think the most important part of the entire video is understanding that the current updates simply aren't satisfactory when it comes to incentivizing PvP, and that we do need extra rewards and incentives to bring people to the wilderness. The Predator vs Prey type updates simply haven't done a good job at reviving the wilderness or pushing people to PvP, and we do need to change course. As many ideas as I've had for the wilderness, I really hope that regardless of how many you like or dislike, you understand that those are the type of ideas we need to strive for when it comes to the wilderness as a whole. A focus on PvP, player versus player, not predator versus prey. Also, while I did say this was a nightmare to make, don't get me wrong, I did have a lot of fun making it. It was definitely way more out there than what I usually do, which is usually skilling content. But I'm honestly really happy how everything turned out. Sorry for taking this long making this video. I know I haven't uploaded anything in November, and I kept delaying it because I felt like it simply wasn't complete enough, or that the content just wasn't good enough. But I do hope the video as a whole was enjoyable, and that, as always, you've learned something from it. And yes, I do realize this video could have probably been cut in like 2 or 3 different parts, but you know me by now. Long videos every once in a while, because that's probably the new course that this channel is gonna take, is honestly, I think this is how I want to start doing things. Anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe, and a little announcement actually, I will be answering your questions and reacting to this video live 2 days from now, on Thursday 6 p.m. BST, so on the 26th, the day after Christmas, on my Twitch channel, which you can find the link in the description and in the pinned comment. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.